Max Dobbs was the one who said, I'd like to have you talk about Utah, national parks and monuments. I go, that's good. This was one of my more recent ones I put together. I call it Road Trip 2 because I have a Road Trip 1, which just focuses on the Four Corners area of Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. But this one takes us all through Utah. And I'm going to show you a few state parks also and a few other places from a biblical worldview. Of course, Utah, as you may or may not be aware, is called the Beehive State, and the images I'm going to show you are all taken off of either Google Maps or Google Earth, unless otherwise noted. I sometimes think Utah should have been named the Awesome Geology State, okay, because there are some things up there to see that are just amazing, and you could take pictures of them and share them with people and say, wow, that looks cool. And then when you actually get there and you take in the whole panorama, you say, wow, it's more awesome than I thought. So here is the map of our travels. I'll give you a second to look at that. Now, I've had some people ask me at the end, hey, how can I get a copy of that map? I want to plan a road trip similar to the one you talked about. No, and by the way, this is not any one particular road trip I've done. This is a kind of a hybridization of several different road trips that I've taken with my wife over the last several years. But I thought I could put this in a kind of in a theoretical one way. And you could do this. To do it justice, I'd give it at least 2 weeks, because you want to spend at least a half a day at some of these sites and a whole day at some others. But we're going to start way down here at Natural Bridges National Monument, and then we're going to wend our way up and around and around and around and around and back over, and we're going to wind up over at Snow Canyon State Park at the very end, okay? We have some audio and video, so we're going to do a little AV check. Here we go. Anybody recognize this?
Hey! Hello in there!
Volume up.
What's so important? What you got here that's worth living for?
Volume up. You heard that? True love. You could not ask for a more noble cause than that. Who is the true lover of our souls? Where does true love come from? Comes from God, okay? And because God loves us, he would never lie to us. He would never mislead us in any sort of way. And he's given us his word as the foundation for our thinking in every area. All right, I mentioned these facts before here. Here's a picture of my wife and I standing at the Kolob Canyon unit of Zion National Park, which we'll be getting back to here near the end of our talk today. 2 Peter 3:3 says this, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. This is the idea of uniformitarian, that what we see now, the rate that sediments accumulated and the rate that things erode, has all been the same. We can't invoke catastrophe, okay? And they were able to hold on that pretty well until Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, and then that really threw a monkey wrench into their plans. For this, they, the scoffers, are willingly ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. So the skeptics, one of the first things the skeptics have to do is to deny that there was ever a worldwide flood, okay? Because they have to assign long ages to the earth to give biology and evolution enough time to work, okay? And so if we can cut out those millions of years, then that pulls the rug completely out of evolution. Whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perish. But here's where it gets more insidious. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and the perdition of ungodly men. God setting a judgment on the earth was, if you will, kind of an earnest that it's going to come again. There will be a judgment. The first one was by water. The next one will be by fire. But if somebody doesn't like the idea of, I'm going to be judged someday, then maybe if I just pretend God doesn't exist and ignore the evidence, that I can kind of live my life that way. Well, you can't escape judgment, okay? You might escape criminal judgment in the civil world, but God's judgment is going to come on everybody. And the fact that you took the time to come out here tonight tells me which side you want to be on, and that's good. But there's others out there that still are in that valley of indecision, and they need help to find their way to choosing God's word as being authoritative in their life. Now, evidence for a global catastrophic flood is one of the strongest proofs that, A, the Bible's account of history and God's dealings with mankind are trustworthy, and B, therefore, God's promise of a coming judgment on the earth is certain as well, and C, therefore, all mankind is accountable to the Creator and Judge who has provided salvation through Jesus Christ. Now, why do I say one of the strongest proofs? Because everybody encounters geology whenever you walk outside. Some places there's more evident than others, but everybody knows about rocks and everybody understands what a mountain is compared to a valley, okay? So let's do a little refreshing on how it is that the Bible deniers or the skeptics or the unbelievers choose to understand geology. This is from a website called Ray Troll, JPEG, whatever, earthtime.org, and he has this cute little colorful illustration of all these different labels of what's known as the geologic column. Is there anybody here that can tell me the one place in the world that the geologic column in its entirety is found? The answer is in the textbooks. It does not exist anywhere in its entire sequence. They take a piece from here and they have to slice it a piece over here and over here and over here. There are names in here like Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, Paleocene, Pliocene, Oligocene. Okay, these are names that were ascribed. And on the right-hand side, in text that you probably can't really see, talks about how many millions of years ago each of these layers supposedly were. So there was long, slow periods of time building up to the current, and the little guy with the blue pickup on top. So I drive a blue pickup too, but mine's better looking than that one. Now, I want to introduce you to this fellow here. This is Taz Walker. He is with Creation Ministries International, Australia. He worked in the energy sector for a long time. He's an engineer and a geologist. And several years ago, he developed he helped produce or was involved in the production of a video called Biblical Geology, Properly Understanding the Rocks. And here's a cover of it. It is no longer available on DVD, but it is available at creationministriesinternational.com or creation.com. But to get there, you go to usstore.creation.com. You can get it in an MP4 video for download. You can stream it for 7 days for $1.99, or you can get an unlimited streaming for $4.99. If you're going to go ahead and get it, get the MP4 version, download it, and then you can put it on a disc and watch it in your DVD player or share it or put it on your phone or however you want to do it. But what Taz Walker did was, he said, instead of having to let the evolutionists define these rock layers and us trying to kind of figure out how do we fit the Bible into it, let's redesign a geologic model using the Bible as our starting point for our thinking. And so he came up and developed the biblical geologic model. And other creation geologists have looked at this model and all said, yeah, he's right on with this. This makes really good sense. And so essentially, every creation geologist refers to this model. Now, if I had a laser pointer, it'd be a little bit easier for me to talk about these different things. So I'm going to step over a little closer, since y'all are on this side anyway. Okay, so you see on the right-hand side, it talks about these different labels here. Now, consider this. At creation took how long? It took a week. Was there a lot of geology going on? Oh yeah, because God was taking everything and forming everything. And so you have the primordial, which is where it was water, okay? Then the ensuing, he brings the land forth. Then you have the derivatives, is where he's putting plants and animals on, okay? And then he's got it there. That's in creation week. It took 1 week, but there's a lot of geology going on. And then you have the pre-flood era, okay, which was about 1,600 years. But during that 1,600 years, we don't have any evidence from the Bible that there was a lot of geological activity going on. Things just kind of continued on. Man was getting more wicked, but there's no mention of any geological processes going on. But then we come to the year of the flood. And in 1 year, that flood created all kinds of geological havoc. It starts off with the eruptive phase. That's the first 40 days of the flood. And then after the 40 days, it says the waters continue to increase, so you go up to 9 days. That's what we have labeled as the ascending phase. That's where this water is swishing around. It's destroying, it's pulverizing rocks. You have the fountains of the great deep. As this water is shooting out of the mantle of the earth, it's going to be stripping away rocks that are alongside of it and adding it to the mix. So it's not going to be a flood like, even like some of the stuff we've seen with this hurricane thing. Okay, that's some pretty nasty stuff. This is going to be a slurry of stuff. It's going to resemble more like concrete slushing around. It's going to have all kinds of rocks and debris and riffraff in there. And as that's tearing across, it's going to be laying down these sediments, tearing across the continents. Then you have the zenithic phase. This is around day 150 when everything starts to come to the head and all the mountains were covered. And then it says, the Bible says, that the floodwaters started to recede. So the first phase of the recessive part is what we call the abative phase. This is where the mountains rose and the valley sank down. Remember that from Psalms, okay? And so you have this upheaval, you have this uplift. I live on the very southern margin of what's known as the Colorado Plateau. This was the part of that area of the United States that was lifted up in a big section. And to get there from the town of Payson, you're at 5,000 feet, and you go up the side of this escarpment, and next thing you know, you're up at 7,000 feet, and that's about where we live. So during this abative phase, water is going to be flowing off the continents in big sheets, and it's going to be stripping off those upper layers. I had somebody ask me a little while ago, why do we not find human fossils? Well, because the humans would have been, the ones alive when the flood started who didn't listen to Noah would have said, uh-oh, I got to find a way to get out of here. So what they're going to do, they're going to climb to the highest mountains, they're going to build makeshift rafts or float on logs, and they're going to try to stay afloat as long as possible. If they're either going to drown in the water and then their bodies will decompose, or if they get buried, those layers are going to be laid down last. They'll be the first ones stripped back off. So that's why we don't find a lot of human fossils in the fossil record. But eventually, that sheet erosion is going to settle down and water will start channelizing into rivers and streams. And that's called the dispersive phase. And so initially, it's going to be big sheets of water rushing off the continents. Eventually, it will start forming channels and start forming river valleys and canyons and things like that. All right, then we get to the end of the flood, and eventually Noah gets off. And then we have this first phase known as the residual. This would have been when the Ice Age happened. And Mike Ord, who is with Creation Ministries International, he's also a member of the Creation Research Society. I've met him personally and his wife Beverly several times. He is like the foremost expert on the Ice Age. So if you want to study something about Ice Age, you go and type in Mike Ord, O-A-R-D, and watch any of his videos. And by his calculations, it would have taken the first 500 years after the flood would have been the buildup of the ice, and then it would have peaked, and then about 200 years later went back down. That's about the time that the book of Job would have been written. And then you have the modern phase. This is where everything is kind of settling down and a lot closer to what we're doing now. There would have been volcanoes going off. There would have been aerosols in the air. The earth was still a mess. In fact, we are still today in a recovering from the effects of Noah's flood. Okay, the earth is still kind of settling down from all of that upheaval. So looking at all these different things, that's going to be the model that we follow. And as we look at these different landforms, we're going to be comparing it to this chart here. So I showed you this illustration before. We're going to put on our biblical glasses, and we're going to make the Bible the starting point for our thinking. And if something appears to contradict the Bible, we say, you know what, I'm going to stick with God's word. Even I may not understand everything, but my trust is going to be here first and in the words of men somewhere down the road. I also mentioned this verse before, Proverbs 18:17. The first to plead his case seems right until another comes and examines him. A lot of people in our culture today have only heard one side of the story. They've been bombarded with the evolutionary scheme. They haven't heard things from a creationist perspective. And maybe all they need is just a conversation to start them thinking about, hey, is there really another way to look at the geological evidence? All right, so in Utah, I said we're going to start at Natural Bridges National Monument. Now, I could have started at Gooseneck State Park, but I actually have this included in my talk on the Four Corners because that's kind of where we're at. And Gooseneck State Park has the San Juan River going in this big serpentine circle there, and I would talk more about that maybe on another visit, perhaps. Pastor Adam, hint, hint, wink, wink. Okay. Natural Bridges National Monument. The first time we visited there was in March. It had snowed the night before. When we got there, somebody had built a little tiny snowman on top of the sign there. This is a map showing that you come into the park from the east and you have to go on a one-way loop in a counterclockwise direction around there. And there are three natural arches there, natural bridges, Sipapu Bridge, Kachina Bridge, and Owachamo Bridge. And as you drive up, this is Sipapu Bridge. Kind of hard to see it, so we'll zoom in a little closer. Do you see it there, kind of near the center of the screen? They have some new interpretive signs. They had some old ones that are getting pretty weather-beaten and weather-worn, but last time we were there, I was like, oh, wow, look, they put up new signs. But here is the text from an older sign, and it talks about Cedar Mesa, a 1,000,000-acre plateau encompassing the monument and surrounding area, is composed of nearly horizontal sedimentary rock layers. During the Permian period, that would have been long ago, they think, wind-blown sands from the north and west were deposited here as dunes. Okay, they're saying this was formed by sand dunes that somehow cemented themselves together. Later sediments buried these dunes, and with time, pressure, and moisture, they became petrified sand or sandstone. Today, geologists label this layer as the Cedar Mesa sandstone. Buried and then tilted and uplifted, the sandstone was slowly exposed by meandering streams. Slowly exposed. And how long would that have taken? A long, long, long time, because they're assuming that all these rocks now are solid rocks, and now we're going to send some water in the form of seasonal monsoon type of streams, and it's going to carve away all this rock and leave these wonderful features, which carried away the overlying sediments. These streams helped carve Sipapu and the other bridges. Now, the Permian layer, they say, was 299 million years ago. And slowly exposed, of course, is supposed to crumble, and then the streams take this away. Now, let me just stop right here and say that people who study, geologists, secular geologists who are not Bible believers, they're studying the erosional rates of the world right now. And they say that all of the continents at the current rates should erode flat down to sea level in 15 million years. So, but then if they're challenged to say, well, then how do you explain this being 299 million years old and still exposed? Well, we don't really want to talk about that, okay? So their actual evidence of erosion rates contradicts their story about how old things really are. So here's the little map. If you go to the website for natural bridges, it'll show you that the initial stage came down and kind of hooked around and then looped back up and then eventually breached at that one point. So here's a little bit closer look. Sipapu Bridge measures 220 feet high, and you have to get under it, take a different picture, 268 feet wide. With a normal camera, without a special lens, you can't get the whole thing in. You can't stand far enough back because of the way the canyon is configured. This is a Google Earth view. Now, I'm going to show you how the path of the alleged stream coming down through this canyon. It originally came down this way and around, and then looped around, and then kind of went back out. Now, here is the interesting thing. Where the stream makes that loop and turns back up, okay, that's the point that they say it eventually breached and came through. So, think about this. Let's just say for now, we'll give that. We'll say, okay, let's suppose that really happened. The water, you can account possibly for the erosion from that point down, okay? But water doesn't jump up in the air and grab rock and pull it down with it. So how then do the evolutionists account for all of that erosion from that point upward? Okay, they can't, because once that water starts going through, it, in theory, would erode everything from that point down, but it wouldn't start going up and eroding up there too. Okay, and that's the problem. And we're talking, several feet of rock there that would have to be removed. So their theory kind of crumbles when you just do some simple observation, some simple mathematics, and what we know about water. Okay, water doesn't jump up in the air and grab rock and pull it down. If you continue on inside the canyon, because you can hike all inside here, you run across these beautiful black stripes. This is known as desert varnish. It's caused by the element manganese, which eventually will bring you around to the second bridge, which is called Kachina Bridge. This is from the viewpoint that you get to see from the road. Zoom in a little closer, and there's the bridge. It is 210 feet tall and 204 feet wide. And then here's their old interpretive sign, and here's the new interpretive sign. But the old one reads here, it talks about Kachina Bridge is still being enlarged by the streams. Flash floods, they say, wear away at the abutments, and gravity pulls at loose rocks, okay? And then on the website, it shows this little illustration here where you have White Canyon coming down from the top and Armstrong Canyon at the bottom. And these two streams then would meet here, and then it eventually breached just a little farther back right there. Now, here is the satellite image. Watch carefully as I draw where these two streams would converge. They're going to come down this way and meet and go out. And then what happens is eventually it breaches and it goes through right there, okay, and that is where the bridge is. Now, you can hike down over some slick rock. It's not too terribly difficult. You get down and you see this. Now, in June of 1992, a 4,000-ton debris pile separated from the corner of the bridge right there, and you look at it, and there is the debris, and the flash floods are not taking it away, okay? So flash floods are not capable of moving debris out of the way, and yet you can see for the most part, this thing is wide open and very sandy. Now, there's something even more interesting about Kachina Bridge, and that is right here. This is a picture of my wife. She is focusing her attention right there on that spot because in Natural Bridges National Park, and you will not see any interpretive signs talking about this, there is a petroglyph, which is chipped into the rock by somebody from a long, long, long time ago, of what resembles that. What might that be? Well, it looks to a lot of people like a sauropod dinosaur. You say, what? Man and dinosaurs together? Well, if we go back to earlier question, did dinosaurs come on the ark? Well, they were reptiles, and God created all living things, and the devil can't create any living thing. He can only mess it up. I'll take it off again and put it back on again. It's really kind of difficult for us to see with a slide here. Answers in Genesis did an article on this some time ago, and they reported that there were some secular geologists, Center and Cole went in there, and they examined these petroglyphs, and they could tell by the layer of oxidation, or the patina they call it, all over these petroglyphs. They say, well, these petroglyphs are obviously hundreds of years old, but we have no idea what the people who carved this thing thought they were looking at or thought they were carving. Now, what's interesting is right alongside of these things, there are antelope and turtles and humans. Then there's this other thing. Well, we don't know what that is, okay? Well, the obvious would be it was a big four-legged, long-necked, long-tailed creature. But again, you won't find anything in the park that talks about that, and the national park rangers won't want to talk about it either. You have multiple mud flats here, and you see the layers are slightly tilted. Here is what we call a contact line. This is between one layer and the next, and look, it is flat. Does it look like there was 100 years between those layers? Or 50? Or 10? No, it looks like one layer was laid down, another was laid down right on top of it. And then you also have above that, it's difficult to see, but you'll see the different angles. It's called cross-bedding. It's when the current is moving this way and laying sand down this way, and then it comes in from a slightly different direction and lays it down at a slightly different angle, and you get these tiltings, these layerings come down. And that is evident of water deposition, not dry sand dunes. We ran across this indigenous creature there. He's kind of cute. It eventually come around to Owachamo Bridge. Owachamo Bridge is 106 feet high and 180 feet across. Now, how much water would have to move through this area to carve all that out? Okay, more or less than a typical monsoon in the summer. 106 feet high. That would be like tsunami-type water moving through there, okay? The story is just not holding up very well, is it? This place is a great place for some people to visit because it's fairly remote and there's no industry or towns nearby, and there's some nighttime photography that people like to take there. And here's a sample from this fellow here. I'd like to go there sometime. My wife would like to take a picture of that, and I'd be happy to join her because they do have a nice little campsite with about 15 primitive campsites there. All right, so they say that these two streams were coming close together, and then they breached at one point there and then breached at a second. So now, getting back to our biblical geologic model, what would be happening? Well, all of these layers would have been laid down during this ascending phase as the floodwaters were building up and laying all these sediments down. Eventually, though, we said they're going to be running off and they're going to be carving out these canyons, and that would have been during this dispersive phase. So the sheet phase has already happened, and now it's carving these channels, and these stream beds are being cut. And now, because the sediment is still soft, the waters can break through, and it's not just a little stream, a little seasonal stream, it's the residual runoff from Noah's flood, taking all these sediments out and away. So you just have to sit there and say, now, I've heard both sides of the story. Which one makes the best sense and has the best evidence to back it up? The biblical flood model. All right, moving to the next one. That would be Canyonlands National Park. We were just stopping in Canyonlands not too long ago. It is on the confluence of the Colorado and the Green Rivers. And there's a sign. As you enter the park, you'll see these two big stone monuments. They're known as the Monitor and the Merrimack, if you're a Civil War history type buff. One of the famous places that a lot of people like to go is this place here. This is called Mesa Arch. And there's lots of photographs of Mesa Arch. And they mostly show the sun rising in the east through the arch. And the reason for that is because on the backside of the arch is about a 1,200-foot sheer cliff dropping straight down to the valley. A little bit other different view. This is what it's like to look out. Some time ago, as we were coming back from a trip to Kentucky last year, I was able to catch this photo of the sun coming up. But if you go to other parts of the canyon, this is looking south from the Green River overlook. Now, please notice the following features. There is a flat horizon, a flat plateau on the back, and then it drops down to another layer there. And then you have the Green River coming through. Follow that blue line right there. But then you have this little side canyon, and this little side canyon, and this little side canyon, and this one, and this one, and this one. And they're all cut back, and there's no stream going in there, yet all this earth, these rock layers, were taken out. So how can we explain those side canyons? Well, again, the secular explanation is that water turns to ice, it gets in there, turns to ice in the winter, it expands, it cracks, the rock falls out, and it widens the canyon. Well, if that's the case, then there should be full of debris, little chunks of rocks, but there isn't any debris in there. So that explanation kind of falls short. Here's kind of an aerial view of what it looks like. Now, there were some researchers looking at this, and someone came up with a test that can be done scientifically in the lab. And it's referred to, the process that they're describing here, and I have it on an accelerated video, is called groundwater sapping, okay? So here's what they did. They laid a bunch of sand out in this trough. It peaks a little bit and it slopes down. They've got a screen on one side to keep the sand from migrating out, and they have a lot of water there. So the water that's on the backside of the screen keeps the sand very saturated. And then on the right-hand side where there's a red line, you see, after that is a fall-off. There's a place where that saturated water can eventually work its way over, and the weight of the sand causes it to squeeze out. And so what they did was they set up an experiment, and they controlled it. They ran several different times under slightly different conditions. You'll see a clock in the upper left in white. When I start this, look what happens. This is just a very passive process. Highly saturated sand, okay, with a place for the water to evacuate out on the right-hand side. And it is forming canyons. Now, there's no river there. It's just very highly saturated sand. So if we take the biblical flood model, we'd say, wow, there was all these sediments. They were still wet. They had layers on top of them. They were pressing down. But as these layers were having all this water squeezed out of them, it was creating its own mini river, if you will, and taking those grains out. If the rocks were already hard, it wouldn't have happened. But if the layers were still wet, like they are at the end of Noah's flood, and it leaves you with these canyons, which looked a lot like those canyons that we saw earlier. And again, like I say, aerial photographs and pictures, they really don't do it justice. But if you go there, there is a campgrounds at Canyonlands National Park. There's only like about 15 spaces, but it's first come, first serve, so you got to take your chance with that. But you're near the town of Moab, Utah, which is not so bad. Again, these layers would have been laid down during the ascending phase and carved out during the dispersive phase. Arches National Park, up the road from there. Now, there's so many visitors to Arches National Park that starting around April, you have to go online and get not really a lottery, but you have to get a reservation. And they say, what time do you anticipate going into the park? And you give them a 1 hour window. And they say, okay, you come in at such and such a time. And but if you show up without one of those, they won't let you in. Unless you get there super early in the morning or super late in the afternoon. But what would be the point? It is estimated there are over 2,000 arches in the park. This is a map of the southern end of the park. As you drive in, you get to see some beautiful formations. This is from the Park Avenue viewpoint. This rock feature there is called Queen Nefertiti because it looks kind of like an Egyptian headdress. You're looking here down into the, I'm trying to think of the name of the, what's the name, Michelle? Grand View, Grand Alley, Grand Avenue. Okay, I knew it was something like that. Grand Avenue, sorry. Okay. The secular geologists tell you that it was formed here during the Entrada Sandstone. You go back here, it was about 160 million years ago. Okay. As you drive through this rock formation, the foreground is called the Organ. The one in the back is called the Tower of Babel. You come to a place called the Fiery Furnace. We have all these little carved hoodoos, very interesting looking. Eventually you get to the upper end, the north end of the camp, and you get out and you can hike along a trail and see several more arches. I'm zooming in little by little. As you zoom in more and more, you see these fins running from the northwest to the southeast in the white area. And you get a little closer, and you get a little closer, and I have in that little trapezoids there, landscape arch, and when you hike out to it, this is what you see. Landscape arch measures 290 feet across and 77 feet high. It may very well be the next arch to collapse. A lot of people thought it would, but this was wall arch one day prior to August 4th, 2008. During the night it collapsed, and the next day they found this. So these arches are collapsing and falling apart, but no new arches are forming. Okay, they have a theory as to how arches form, but nobody's ever seen one form, but they have found them falling apart. Now, the most famous arch in the park, and probably the most famous arch in the whole state of Utah, is this one here called Delicate Arch. You have to hike out to it. If you take a look, that's me standing underneath it, just for scale. And here's a picture of my lovely wife standing underneath it. In fact, it's so famous that Utah has it on their state license plates. And if you're to say, well, why are most of the pictures of it on one side? Because on the back side, it falls off into a very deep little slick rock. If you were to fall down there, it wouldn't be a rescue, it'd be a recovery type of thing. Now, I mentioned Mike Ord earlier about talking about the Ice Age and the flood. He did an article in the Journal of Creation for this. I'll just kind of briefly skip over a lot of it, but he talks about the assumed uniformitarian origin not observed. We don't see arches forming over long, slow, gradual periods of time. He talks about them weathering and collapsing. He defines uniformitarian being the long, slow process. And then he says, no one has seen an arch formed by this mechanism. So they have a story, but they don't have any observational evidence to back it up. Well, we weren't there during the flood, but we have a historical account. So from that, we can build a geologic model. And he says here, arches would have formed during either the sheet flow or channelized flow phase of the retreating stage, while the natural bridges probably formed during the channelized phase. Then he says here, arch formation cannot be due solely to weathering and erosion, however, because these processes are not restricted to the sites of arches in rock fins. There must be some factor that locally enhances the effects of erosion within a rather small part of a rock fin to produce an arch. Now, he's quoting the evolutionists here, how erosion is localized within a rock fin is enigmatic, which means they don't have an answer for it. Or in other words, long, slow, gradual process don't cut it. Now, when you get the brochure at the visitors, at the gate there, they let you in, they show, here we have these rocks, and then they get these little splits, and eventually they erode out, and eventually they form. That's essentially the correct sequence, but they're putting millions of years in the place of Noah's flood. If you have a flood, you have this erosion happening on a fast scale, and then you have all of the debris being swept away by those floodwaters. Now, I want to introduce you to Awesome Science Media. This is one of their logos here. The executive producer and director is this guy here named Kyle Justice, And several years ago, he had his son Noah Justice, who he started when he was about 12 years old, and they put together a 12-part series where he goes around and visits many national parks. And he started when he was 12, but he was like 15 when he finished. So you see his voice getting a little deeper and getting a little taller as he gets older. But they did a feature on Arches National Park, and I'm going to have Noah here explain a little bit about an actual laboratory-conducted scientific experiment showing natural arch formation.
The fact that bridges and arches are not forming today, but have formed at a high rate in the past, would give good motivation for believing in catastrophic processes, such as the global flood as described in the Bible. A recent lab experiment at Charles University in Prague might also give clues for another model of how the arches formed. In this experiment, scientists submerged a piece of sandstone in water. A weight was put on top of the sandstone, then a funny thing happened. The water began to erode the softer parts of the submerged sandstone, but the harder parts of the sandstone stayed, causing an underwater arch to form. This experiment would fit well with the flood model. During the first 150 days of the flood, water would have laid down the sandstones quickly. They would have been saturated with water, while additional sediments were deposited on top of the sandstone. In this model, arches would have formed in these sediment layers. As the floodwaters receded, massive sheet erosion would have taken off the top layers and some of the sandstone underneath, leaving the arches. Because of natural erosion over the past 4,000 years, the arches would have naturally become smaller and fewer, leaving only the 2,000 that we find in the park today. When we use a catastrophic model to build arches, the observations make a lot more sense, rather than the slow and gradual processes proposed by naturalists. Arches National Park, a great testament to the global flood. Even though it was a global destruction, God left some pretty great formations for us to admire today. Science, it's awesome.
Science, it's awesome. All right, let's go back to that biblical geologic model. Again, the ascending phase would have laid down the layers, and he says that it would have been around the dispersive phase that these arches would have formed. And you saw how when they had the weight on top and current moving around it, okay, then sand was just kind of coming out, but the weight caused stress points to be formed along these edges here that gave it a natural arch appearance. You can go out and walk on top of some of these fins. My wife and I did that on our visit there, and we ran into some people from Great Britain, and they took our picture, and we thanked them for that. Here's double arch, and just to give you an idea of the size of it, there's me again way down there to show you this. Now, to get to Arches National Park from anywhere in the south, you have to go up Highway 191 through Moab, Utah, and while you're there, I highly recommend you stop and eat at Pasta J's restaurant. Really great Italian food, and they have gluten-free options as well. And if you don't really care for Italian, you want to try something different, you could try the Indo Grill. It's a fairly new restaurant, only been there for a few months. Seriously good Indian food. Okay. Indian as in like Far East, not come to our casino type Indian thing. Okay. Dinosaur National Monument. You drive up there, you get to the monument, you see the sign, you go to the visitor center, you meet it by this colorfully painted model of a stegosaurus. They put you on this little electric car and they take you up to this building. Notice how the back wall of the building is sloped at a very steep angle. That's because the angle of the rock has been tilted to that angle. Now, as you're driving up, you'll look around, you'll see that these things are tilted at about a 54 to 60 degree angle. And when you get inside that building, you have a wall here full of dinosaur bones. There are so many bones on display. But what's interesting, and there are signs that mention this, but they don't mention it prominently, and that is that mingled with these dinosaur bones are marine fossils, notably clams, clamshells. It's really kind of hard to see them in the pictures here. You really want to have to get up close to see them. But they even have some large ones that you can touch. They say, here's one, you go ahead and touch it. Now, I want to go back to these layers here. I want to focus on this aspect of this picture here. Look at how those layers just kind of swoop up and go up almost to a 90-degree angle. layers do not become tilted or bent over long, slow, gradual eons of time. I mentioned Dr. Andrew Snelling and the work that he's doing in the Grand Canyon. These layers had to have been bent up when that area was still soft, because there's a lot of earth movements taking place at the end of the flood, because, again, we're told in Psalms that the mountains rose and valleys sank down. So there was all kinds of movement going on. The earth was still a kind of a difficult place to be, and that's why God told Noah, stay in the ark for a while after, give the earth a chance to dry out and seeds to sprout and stuff like that. Ascending phase for the deposition, and the abative phase. This is more the sheetrock phase, when things were tilted, but before rivers are being carved, because we're not really seeing that there. Now, I'm going to mention this. The closest big town next to Dinosaur National Monument is Vernal, Utah. And 11 miles outside of town, on a 19-minute drive, is a private place called McConkey Ranch Petroglyph Site. And there's a little sign there, owned and operated by Bar V Bar Enterprises. It's open from dawn to dusk. You drive in. There's a nice little paved parking lot. You go into the little booth there that says suggested donation, $5 per vehicle. You walk in, there's a little table there with an old Army ammo box with a chain welded to it. It says, put your money in here. And there's a refrigerator in the corner. If you want a soda, you put $1 in, grab a soda. You want to buy a cap there, you put in $10, buy a cap. You want to buy a t-shirt, put $15 in, get yourself a t-shirt. It's not manned or anything like that. It's all just on the honor system. There's little maps there, and you walk in behind on this private property, and you see what I believe, in my own personal observation, the best petroglyphs in the entire Southwest of any place I've been. And they're not just little tiny petroglyphs. Some of these things are life-size, okay, with big trapezoidal breastplates and big shields and big faces. And you can get right up close and personal to these. You don't have to see them from a distance. There's no fence or anything keeping them apart from you. Elaborate, ornate. Look at some of the, on the breastplates, little dots and the headdresses and things. And so the people who live there did this. And it's a private site. It's on the National Registry of Historic Places. So for the McConkey Ranch Petroglyph, this is just one I guess I thought I'd throw it in. This would have been during that modern phase. The flood is over. Mankind has migrated. They've made their way to the North American continent, and they're setting up shop here, and they decide to make these interesting petroglyphs. All right, moving down the road, you come to Goblin Valley State Park. And you say, well, why do they call it Goblin Valley? Well, because it has these really interesting hoodoos. Again, they say this was the Entrada sandstone, supposedly between 140 and 170 million years ago. And they have these really interesting shapes. They look like toadstools or mushrooms all over the place. But is there a problem with the idea of long, slow, gradual? Yes, there is. Okay. Several geologists, I told you, have concluded that the Earth should have eroded down to sea level in 15 million years. So how can you account for something that's 8 to 50 million years old? Well, isn't that just kind of amazing? If this looks familiar to any sci-fi comedy buffs, it's because back in around 1995, a movie was partially filmed at this location. Did anybody happen to see Galaxy Quest with Tim Allen and such? Well, they have to land on an alien planet to get a beryllium sphere to power their craft that's been damaged, and so they chose this as a spot for this sci-fi adventure here.
Hey, don't open that! It's an alien planet! Is there air? You don't know!
Seems okay.
I've been there a couple times, and the air is just fine, really. No problem with it at all. I didn't see any blue-skinned alien creatures there either. Didn't find any beryllium spheres there. Didn't see any rock monsters there. But hey, very interesting place to visit. And as you come in, there's this sign here, and it says seafront property. Oh yeah, they got to include water somehow. So they say here that 170 million years ago, during the Jurassic period, you would have been on seafront property. During this period, Goblin Valley was a muddy tidal flat along an inland sea. The waves of the tidal flat deposited sand, silt, and clay. With pressure and time, the sediment became goblin-forming entrada sandstone. And that muddy tidal flat, like I say, was about 145 to 170 million years ago. Well, if that's the case, why are they still there? Okay, they're still there. The layers would have been laid down during the ascending phase and scrubbed off during that, probably near close to the border between the abative and the dispersive phase. As you're driving out, you get to see these three little fellows in the evening sunset waving at you as you leave the park. All right, we're going to head down next to Capitol Reef National Park. And there's the sign. And Capitol Reef is named after this rock formation called Capitol Dome. Here's another picture of it there. The reef part of Capitol Reef comes from this area here. It's known as the Water Pocket Fold. It acted as a barrier for east-west travel, which is mostly Mormons and wagons. It acts like a reef does to ocean travel. It is an example of what's known in geological activity as a monocline. It is the largest exposed monocline in North America. It's just under 100 miles long, and it runs all the way down to Lake Powell. Here's another aerial photograph. Now, what is a monocline? Well, a monocline is when you have layers on top, layers underneath, that shift. Those would be the granites, those would be the creation rocks shifted, but the layers on top, but the break, the faulting doesn't extend all the way up to the top. The upper layers shift and they kind of fold out maybe like a deck of cards when you go like this, although none of us here do that, right? Anyway, so these upper layers are bending along that fault line. Now, there's something very interesting also, that when you take a close look at the sediment around there, you see fossilized clams. What are they doing so far from the ocean? Did they crawl up on land and scurry some 600-700 miles from the Pacific to get there? No. They say, but so that's where they kind of get this whole idea of this tranquil stream thing. This is along what's known as the Notom Bullfrog Road. This oyster shells in these reefs, clams and oysters. There's a place called the Hickman Bridge where you can take a hike under. You can go up to this place here, a Chimney Rock. But there's something also very interesting you'll see in this park. In certain areas, you come across these black, rounded rocks sitting on top of other rocks. Some of them are up to 9 feet in diameter, and they're called lava bombs, okay? They were ejected from a volcano. The exact location is uncertain. Some of these have been documented to be hurled 3,300 feet in the air. How do we know this? Because in November of 2010, a volcano in Iceland erupted, and it was throwing out lava bombs. And there just happened to be somebody flying by in an airplane taking a look at this. Now, if you look carefully, when these lava bombs are being ejected, they're going to be hot, and they're going to be leaving little streams of smoke behind them there. And there are people standing on this rock watching these things. I would not, if I was a tourist, that would not be something that would really excite me, to be out there being rained on by lava bombs. But there they are being ejected. And they're, like I say, they're exposed. There's no evidence of sedimentary layer on top of them, okay? So the rocks that they landed on would have been hard enough. If they were still muddy, they would have impaled themselves into the mud, and they would be in there. So they're all sitting on top, and they're black, and they're not like any other rock indigenous to that area. They're not sedimentary. They're igneous rocks. And they came from, well, just like the ones here in Iceland, okay? So when would those lava bombs, well, first of all, the layers, again, would have been laid down to the ascending phase. That's responsible for laying down a lot of these layers. But those lava bombs would have been during that residual phase, okay? The ground had to have enough time to harden when that volcano was throwing these rocks around and coming down and landing on the ground. Now, if you ever happen to be in western Arizona and you want to follow the old Route 66, there are still portions of it available, and you're only a few miles from the California border. There's another area there that has these same kind of rocks peppered all around on the ground. Residual rocks. Now, the next place we're going to go is the Escalante Petrified Forest State Park, but to get there, we have to drive across something called the Hogback. And here is a video done by the Flip Flop Wanderer. He had a drone and he had it programmed to follow his car as he was driving across the hogback. Now, what makes the hogback unique is that it's up on a ridgeline and it's about 1,200 feet down on either side of the road. There's not a whole lot of shoulder there, and you're driving along, and it's quite an interesting panorama. The first time we drove across it many years ago, there were no pullouts on the side. It was 2 lanes, but you got people wanting to stop and take pictures and stuff, and it's like, that's kind of risky, you know? But they repaved that road some time ago, and they added little pullouts for people that you can see what that might look like there. Very cool place to be. Now, by the way, this area we're in is the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. This area of Utah was actually the last area of the contiguous 48 states to be mapped by the U.S. Geological Society because it is so remote. Before that, there were jeep trails. There was no paved highway there until the early 70s. But there are all these little towns back there that have just been surviving quite well. We drove by, we saw this sign, Petrified Forest State Park. Hey, let's go there. So we went in. And they have beautiful petrified logs, very similar to the logs we have at the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. Beautiful colors. They're all along the trail. You have to scoot around them and stuff. It takes you eventually out to this valley where you turn around and head back up. You can see pictures of them there. And some of these colors are absolutely amazing. I went to a rock shop and I found a placard here, a thing that describes where these different colors come from. Red and orange usually come from iron. Yellow can also be from iron or uranium. Tan and pink come from iron usually. White comes from natural quartz. Blue can come from copper or iron. Black or gray can come from carbon or manganese. And green can come from copper or chromium and occasionally iron. So, sedimentary deposits during the ascending phase and the petrification process would have happened somewhere again, probably around this abative dispersive phase. You have to have a lot of water around covering these logs with lots of silica in it with other minerals present so they can infuse themselves into and replace the wood cells with rock. Then we go down here to Kodachrome Basin State Park, one of my favorite places to go to. It's most notably known for these pipes or these chimneys that come up from the ground. They are, the surrounding mountains is pretty flat plain with some hills around that are generally pink, but these pipes coming up are generally grayish in color. They're made of the material from the layer underneath the red layer. They vary in size from a few feet across to 53 feet across is the biggest one. The tallest one in the park is 172 feet tall. And there are over 60 of them just in the park, but they've documented 100 of them across southern Utah. Here's a couple of other ones. And so here's one viewed from an upper viewpoint. Now here's the deal. You see that little white one right there? And it's surrounded by pink ones. Now they say that the Carmel Formation formed 179 million years ago, and they say that the Entrada sandstone above it formed 166 million years ago. So that leaves a difference of 13 million years. So what they're saying is that this underlying Carmel Formation stayed soft underground for 13 million years, and then eventually some earthquakes happened, and it squeezed up like toothpaste in a tube, and then it hardened. Okay? Does that make sense? Does that even seem reasonable? Whether you have a degree in geology or not. But here's the thing. Something had to create that tube to hold it there for that rock to solidify, and then something had to scour away that rock. Okay? So we got erosional processes happening, and how far up did they have to come? They would have had to come up 1,035 feet. Okay? Rock does not stay soft in a tube like toothpaste for 13 million years. Kodachrome Basin State Park is a big enigma for the evolutionary geologists. One of the first formations you'll see as you come in is this one here. It's kind of hard to see it with the right angle and sunlight, but my wife and I refer to it as candle in a cupcake, because that's what it looks like. And we stayed there not long ago, and we stayed at this campsite, and we had this right behind us there. And if you go, I would recommend try to get campsite number 13, okay? That puts you really close to that right there. All right, the layers were laid down during the ascending phase. The erosion happened during the abative phase. And then we're going to jump over here to Bryce Canyon State Park. But to get to Bryce Canyon State Park from there, you have to drive through two towns. One is called Cannonville, not a whole lot there. But then you also get to the town of Tropic, Utah. And when you're in Tropic, Utah, I highly recommend you stop at the pizza place. It's a family-run business there. They have great pizza, even have gluten-free options for those of you who need that, okay? Love to eat there in the town of Tropic, Utah. But you get to Bryce Canyon. Our first trip there was actually in March, and it had snowed quite a bit still in the winter. It was named after a fellow named Ebenezer Bryce who tried to keep cattle in the area, but they kept getting lost in this maze of hoodoos there, and so he got frustrated and he eventually left. But from various viewpoints, you see these beautiful hoodoos. In fact, when you go into the visitor center, in the hallway, across from the restrooms, they have this "Who Do You Love?" This is a natural bridge, elevation 8,627 feet. This is called Thor's Hammer. This is the Navajo Loop Trail. You see it's nothing but a whole bunch of switchbacks to get you down to a certain little place. And on Google 3D Maps, it looks a little bit like this. But there's all kinds of different trails. Some of them are closed during certain times of the year for maintenance or construction or because of an avalanche or something like that happened. Now, I'm going to show you a slide that's produced by the government, okay, National Park Service, and it's really long and really skinny. And if I try to put it all up here on one slide, then everything is so small you can't see it. So I'm going to kind of run it past you slowly so you can see it. And I want you to take note of the bright green line, kind of a lime green line I drew. And that line is going to represent the top layer of the north rim of the Grand Canyon. You follow it along, you see that the layers kind of bend down, and then you start seeing more layers build up on top of that green line, okay? And eventually, it brings you over to Bryce Canyon. So, when you get to the Grand Canyon, you're looking at all those layers, you're just looking at the first page or the first chapter of the story. All these other layers were added on top of that, and they were eroded away, but they remain behind in Utah. That's why they call it the Grand Staircase, because they kind of stair-step on their way up. Now, the green line over here, you see where it goes? From there, near Cedar City, Utah, all the way up to Cedar Breaks, that represents almost 10,000 feet, which is almost 2 miles of sediment. Now, it's not 2 miles higher because the layers have been tilted and bent down, but as you go through, those layers are all accountable in there. Here's what it would look like if you stacked them all up vertically without the bending. From there to there is about 10,000 feet. Now, let's go back to this illustration to see how long and skinny it is. From Bryce Canyon there all the way over to the north rim of the Grand Canyon is only about 100 miles or so as the crow flies. So within that 100 miles south to north span, you're going up through all these different layers of rocks, and you can see them, and they've got names for them all. You've got the Vermilion Cliffs, and the Chocolate Cliffs, and the Pink Cliffs, and the White Cliffs. So all of these layers here show that, hey, as incredible as the Grand Canyon is, and I don't really have a talk on the Grand Canyon because there's so many other people that already talk about it anyway. It's like I want to go find some other things that people don't know necessarily that much about. And so Utah is a great place. That's why I did a whole talk on it here. We start with the ascending phase, and during this abative phase is when these things were scoured away, but not enough to leave river canyons and stuff like that yet. So the big sheet erosion. Then we get down over here to Zion National Park, but before we get to Zion National Park, we're going to take one more little detour to a place called Cedar Breaks National Monument. And Cedar Breaks National Monument looks a lot like Bryce Canyon. Well, it's basically the same rocks on a slightly different mountain range. It has very similar features, but it also has something else. It is one of the few places that has bristlecone pine trees. Now, if anybody is kind of savvy on this, bristlecone pine trees are supposedly the oldest organism living on the planet. How old are they? The USDA website says they are 4,789 years old. The oldest one they've been able to identify, they say, is 4,789 years old. Well, let me ask this question. If the Earth is 4.2 billion years old, then why is the oldest thing on Earth only 4,789 years old? They call it bristlecone pine because you hold it in your hand. It's like a bottle brush, okay? Pretty cool. Now, let's go back to this. This is the year 2024. Let's subtract 4,789. That would put us at the year 2,765 BC. Now, let's start with Bishop Ussher's assumed age of the earth. His calculated age of the earth is around 4004 BC. And according to biblical genealogies, the flood would have occurred about 1,656 years. So, if you add or subtract 1,656 from 4,004, you get 2348 BC. That is only a 417-year difference between Noah's flood and the oldest thing on the earth. That's well within the range of how long it would take for a tree to get started, and probably even more than that, and we don't know how accurate their dating system is, but you see, the oldest living thing on earth is very, very close in age to the end of Noah's flood that wiped out everything and everything started over again. But again, I would ask the question, if the earth is 4.2 billion years old, why isn't there something at least 10,000 years old out there? I think we can go to God's word and say, hey, God's word is still being validated today. All right, I talked about Zion National Park. If you come in on the east entrance, you'll see this, one of the first things you'll run into. This is called Checkerboard Mesa. It's made from Navajo sandstone. You'll see there's horizontal lines forming cross bedding. Now, the interesting thing about Navajo sandstone is that geologists who study this rock, they say, well, Navajo sandstone doesn't form here, but it does form in the Appalachian range about 1,800, about how many miles away? About 1,800 miles away. How would that much sediment be carried across the continent? Would it have been a river? Okay, would it have been a tranquil sea? Or would it have been a global flood? You decide. Anyways, you continue entering, you'll come to a gate here with a tunnel, and then you have to go through. It's one way at a time, because the tunnel was built a long time ago, and it can only accommodate vehicles of a certain size. Here's a little map talking about it, and the tunnel. And as you drive through the tunnel, you'll eventually come to a few little windows that they put in there, give you just a kind of a sneak preview of what you're going to be looking at in the park. And this is what it looks like from the outside. Eventually you get into the park and you'll see rock features like the West Temple or the Altar of Sacrifice, okay, because it looks like it has blood running down the side. This is the Great White Throne, and across from the Great White Throne, you can hike up a trail called the Angel's Landing, excuse me. Get the devil out of here. Angel's Landing, okay? If you can make it up that high. You initially get up and you find yourself at the end of what's called Refrigerator Canyon because a cool breeze blows through this thing continually all the time. And another family we met from Great Britain who happened to be there. Would you like us to take your picture? Yes, thank you very much, sir. So you head up Refrigerator Canyon, looks like this. When you get to the end of Refrigerator Canyon, you'll see this rock formation here, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer, and I want you to look. I've highlighted here the crossbedding. You've got a surface there, and then another one there, and another one there. Then over here, you got a big circular thing. This is called a parabolic recumbent fold. This rock layer was laid down, and then it was bent back on itself, okay? That only happens when that rock is soft like taffy. Then you come to a place called Walter's Wiggles, which is a whole bunch of little switchbacks that get you up to a place called Scout's Landing. From Scout's Landing, you look out at Angel's Landing, and if you want to dare to hike out there, it gets pretty precarious, but you could make it out there. And that's looking to the south, but if you look at the east, you're right across from the Great White Throne. And I took this picture out there, and when I was up there, I met some students from Washington University in St. Louis, and they were on their spring vacation, and so one of them offered to take my picture, and yeah, there's a little bit of perspiration on my t-shirt, but it was well worth the effort. I want to take you now over to the other part of the western part of Zion, to Kalab Canyon, and you experience something called hanging valleys, water hanging valleys. Well, that's this area here. So how are hanging valleys formed? Well, the best explanation is that the area in front of it had water scooting along this way and carving a canyon, which then formed a breach and allowed water to come out and overspill, but eventually the water stopped and it left with this hanging valley. And hanging valleys, there would be, if it was all long and slow and gradual, then both of those valleys should be down to the same level. But all across southern Utah, you can see hanging valleys everywhere, and not just in Utah, but a few other places as well. Maybe even in Texas. Haven't seen one yet, but I've only come in from the west. Layers were formed during the ascending phase and carved during this dispersive phase. Okay, we're getting close to the end here, folks. Coral Pink Sand Dunes State Park. Coral Pink Sand Dunes has this. And what does one see at Coral Pink Sand Dunes State Park? You see coral pink sand dunes. Well, of course. And you can walk on them. And then you see interpretive signs, right? And here's what it says. Gather white sand, cover with ocean, add iron oxide, let sit for 170 million years, and then you'll have dunes. Well, there's a big problem with that. Okay, you see these mountains in the background? According to secular geology, they should have eroded away after 15 million years, but they're still here. So where do they come up with this 170 million year time frame? And remember, the layers that we've seen are all laid down there flat like pancakes, one on top of the other on top of the other. Sand dunes like this are all kind of wavy and stuff. Why don't we see layers in the rock actually form that way? There are many inland sand dune locations in the world. Why is it that none of them are turning into stone before our eyes? Okay. Continents would have to submerge to bring in this ocean water, and then it would have to bring in quartz or silica to act as a cementing agent for this water or for these rocks. Well, we've seen numerous examples of very thick sandstone layers. And the secular geologists say these were formed over millions of years. But again, the flat contact lines, that kind of destroys that whole theory. And when you look out there, I don't see flat lines. I see these beautiful wavy, curvy sand dunes that just invite you to go out there and maybe bring a sports bottle or something and scoop up some and take it back with you. But you didn't hear that from me. All right, when were these sand dunes? Well, really kind of hard to say. I don't really have a really great explanation of this. It's kind of like, well, obviously the elements were laid down during that ascending phase, but how they were exposed and why they're there and why it hasn't petrified and stuff, we really don't have a time frame for that. All right, now that brings us to our last stop, Snow Canyon State Park. It was not named because it snows there. It was named because of a guy named Snow. It's just outside of St. George, Utah. There are some very interesting, surreal-looking rock formations with all kinds of thin lines and swirly little cross beddings and things like that. And there's also this massive lava flow. Now notice this lava flow is very visible. It's on the top. There's no sedimentary layers on top of that. So would that have been earlier or later? Well, that would have been a later event because there's no other layers on top of it. But where you have lava flows, oftentimes you get lava tubes, which you can crawl down and explore. Now, do you remember back at Checkerboard Mesa, I talked about these crisscross patterns here? Well, at Snow Canyon, they have an amphitheater, and it has the same kind of patterns, but an inverse layout. It's laid out like an amphitheater, kind of like an inverted mesa. And that's just a little bit interesting. Again, all right, so these layers were laid down during the ascending phase, the canyon was cut during the dispersive phase, and the lava flows and the lava tubes would have been in this residual phase after the floodwaters have receded and flowed out. So, getting back to Psalms 104, verse 8, the mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place where you appointed for them. And in Luke 19:40, it says, he, being Jesus, answered, I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would crowd. And indeed, we can say that the rocks do crowd, and they testify, and they give confirmation, not scientific proof, but they do give valid confirmation of the fact that there was a global flood that laid all these things down and created them. It wasn't millions of years. And all you have to do is learn how to put on those biblical glasses, and when you do, you find that geology is fun. In fact, geology can be incredibly fun. You don't need to have a college degree to appreciate it. I only took one class my freshman year in basic geology. I remembered enough to pass the class, and I remembered about sedimentary, metamorphic, and igneous rocks and stuff like that. But you can do your own follow-up study and learn about these things. There are many books, DVDs, and things available. I mentioned some of the resources, and I would invite you to look at the table back there. And if you wanted to make an offering in the amount of the dollar sign put on the back, and you get that as a gift, right? Okay. John 17:17. Thy word is truth. And my hope is that from this presentation that you take away something that will inspire you even more to believe in the truth and the authority of God's word, his holy Bible. And I thank you. Now, this is the only, now I had somebody say, hey, you know those QR codes you showed us? I wish we had a little more advanced notice because by the time I got my camera out, you'd moved on. Okay, so I'm going to tell you, I have only one QR code because after giving this talk and several others, I had people say, can you get me a copy of that map? And I said, well, you know what? I'll do this. I'll put it up there. And I have it on my Google Drive, and if you were to take a picture of that, then you link it up to your Google Drive. Now, you may have to take a picture on your phone, right, and then use somebody else's phone to scan that you've taken and take that as a picture type of thing, but however you can get it. Otherwise, if you need to, you can get a hold of me through Pastor Adam or through Max back there, because they have my email address, and if you really need some help with that. And in fact, if any of you, since you took the trouble and time to come out here this evening and go through all this,